Hello and good morning to everybody who is tuned into today's webinar. I am Arvin Narvaza from the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines System. I will be starting the session today and we shall begin with a prayer. So let us take a moment to put ourselves in a solemn state to ask for guidance, protection, and blessings from our divine. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us. We are truly grateful for them. Thank you for allowing us today to gather in mind and soul so we could share each other the knowledge and time in this seminar. May you extend your divine wisdom to the speaker so that they would be able to impart effectively their God-given knowledge to everyone participating. May you bless them so they may continue to impart their expertise to those who need them. Bless the participants as well so that they would be able to glean the vital information from this session. May you bestow your blessings after this webinar so that we may go out and spread what we learned in the spirit of your love and generosity. May we realize that this activity should glorify your name. Amen. Okay, so good morning once again to our fellow educators of the mission who are with us right now on Facebook. If you have colleagues who are not tuned in yet, we encourage to have them join us in this session. All right, so let me share some important reminders before we proceed to the highlights of this activity. We would like to once again invite the participants to create their LMS accounts so you could access all of the resources the speakers have shared during their talks, including those of the previous sessions and the sessions to come. An active link will be provided on CHED Regional Office 10's official Facebook page exclusively for this session. If you finish your attempt to register, please wait for an email confirmation to be sent to you, which will include your login credentials. And also, if you already have your accounts, please do not forget to give us your evaluation for us to know if we have given you the webinars you truly need. All right? Okay, so as what you can see on the screen right now, this is the link. It will be posted on CHED Regional Office 10's official Facebook page. Now that's all clear. Allow me to present you our first speaker for this session. So please allow me to share my screen. So Dr. Amparo Dinagsao earned her undergraduate and master's degrees at USTP, formerly MUST, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in industrial education, major in mathematics, and a master of science in teaching mathematics, respectively. She earned her Doctor of Philosophy in Education in Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan. She was part of the Xavier University Center for the Advancement in Teaching for 6 years. She has conducted numerous seminar workshops on advanced research statistics, assessment of learning methods, test constructions of all types, research-based teaching strategies, to name a few. Some of her recognitions include an award from XUADC Magis Award for Outstanding Administrator in 2012, Outstanding Alumni in the Field of Education in 2015 from Pilgrim Christian College. Currently, she is the director of the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning at the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines. Now, please help me welcome Dr. Amparo Dinagsao.
From my friends in Zoom, can you please tell me if I'm coming in clear and if you're seeing my screen also clearly? Are you seeing that? Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I also would like to say mabuhay, good morning to our friends in Facebook who are also watching, especially the people from Region 10, our colleagues in the profession. Yesterday, I was with you, and please allow me to be with you this morning for continuity, because we're talking about rubrics this morning. And yesterday, we talked about how we're going to design our assessments so that we would be able to determine if our students have achieved the learning outcomes and that they have developed their competencies. No, so thank you for joining me yesterday, and for we have had a great set of participants yesterday. No? You have already you have participated in our Google Forms and responded and shared as well your thoughts on Facebook. And thank you so much. Despite some difficulties and some glitches yesterday, but we also have responded to some requests for the PowerPoint presentation, as well as some requests from different universities and colleges all over the country for the course template and for the course module. Course module template and course guide template. It's always a joy, and we're always glad from USTP and specifically from my center, Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, or CITL. We're always glad to be of help to our colleagues in the profession. This morning, we're going to have a little review on the principles of effective assessment, because we have had a great amount of time discussing that part. In anything that we do, especially when we're trying to determine and we're creating a tool to determine whether our students are learning, it has to be anchored on some principles. And so this morning, let's get back a little bit on that. And then yesterday also, we emphasized on creating performance-based tests. I'll just talk a little bit on that, but our main focus for this morning is on creating rubrics for assessing your students' performance. And then we'll have Sir Arvin, my colleague in the university, to share on the crafting process of a rubric. So I'll introduce Sir Arvin formally later. All right. So yesterday, we really emphasized when we state the word assessment, exactly what do we mean, so that we will have a leveling off, of when we talk about assessment. This means that it's any process, it's any activity that you do that will help you infer about students' learning, about whether they're understanding, whether something that would tell you that they have developed the abilities. And very important, what is assessment? It is based on data, meaning that you are getting some information about if your students are progressing. So this is an assessment. But they're also called a tool, they're the process, as well as a map and all that. All right. So in the entire plan in our journey to create and implement our flexible learning, these three, or this alignment, should really be kept in mind. That's the reason why on day 2 we revisited and we tried to redesign our syllabus and really then determine if our course level outcomes are aligned to your program outcomes. So maybe this is an opportunity. And then of course, for this particular module, that's why we had 3 days for this, because it is really a big chunk when we are planning our course, meaning our subject, in terms of assessment of student learning. And then of course, the next set of modules will be, how do you determine, how do you create, and what are those perfect opportunities and teaching learning experience and activities that you're going to provide to your students, so that at the end, they will be able to demonstrate that they have achieved that outcome. So for this part, and for Monday as well, and yesterday, it was about how do we assess our students. So yesterday it was designing, and we focused the alignment of what tasks did we plan, and if it is aligned to the course outcome, and then we considered the different principles. So for this time, when we're planning a performance-based assessment, exactly what rubric are we going to do? So I will talk about more on that. So in the principles of effective assessment, in anything that you do, are you asking your students to demonstrate to you whether they've learned through an oral recitation, through a performance task, through a project, through a laboratory activity. First that we're going to consider is that it matches assessment with your learning outcomes. So we've emphasized that yesterday. The task has to really show you, our dear faculty, that our students learn, right? And second, that our tool, our assessment activity should measure deep understanding, performance, and content. Okay? Not just measuring recall, right? Because I think our course outcome in the first place requires our student to apply, to synthesize, to analyze, to evaluate, all that, no? And then, of course, whatever your assessments are, it has for whatever the outcomes that you wanted your students or you wanted to see in your students, get it from different and variety mode and from different ways. So use multiple measures, and of course use appropriate methods and techniques. And please, let's also consider time, resources, no? And that we don't also disadvantage a certain group, and that's why our tool has to be practical as well. And of course, in everything, use tools that are reliable as well as valid. Okay, so yesterday, in terms of performance-based assessment, I asked you, if you're now trying to hire a driver, and then you have applicant A, would you like to hire a driver that passed the written test and failed the actual driving test? Will you hire a driver that failed the written test but passed the actual test? Is that a better driver? Some of you responded yesterday that you're not going to be comfortable if they only pass the written test, of course, because that's actual driving. But if they pass the actual test and fail the written test, that may not really still be okay, right? Because again, you wanted to really see if they can also apply that skill. Driving is a skill. But you also want to see if they also have learned the concept. And so in this particular situation, and we can also say that parallel to how we're developing our students, we want them to really develop the skill and to have passed both the written as well as the actual driving. So the point here is that it's not enough, no? Get back to the principle to only use one testing method or testing measure to be able to determine if our students have achieved the outcome. So that's a principle. And yesterday, when I asked, almost 400 of our participants responded to that particular Google form. When you responded, you said that's not going to be a promising, that's a very questionable assessment practice when you only use one testing method to determine whether students have learned. So that is good. That is good to know that we are of the same level in terms of that we have to use multiple measures to really determine if our students are learning. So in this particular, I also want to emphasize, and I have emphasized yesterday, there's no such thing as a performance test is better than having a written test, or written is more powerful than performance test. Again, when we get back to the principle, use multiple measures of test, and at the same time, there is what you call balanced assessment. No? A good amount of opportunity for students to show us whether they have learned, and a good amount of written to determine whether our students have learned the theory and the content and all that. So, but the focus for this morning is we have to also provide or determine what the outcome by really assessing through performance tasks. Okay, so just a few, what is a task? A task is a piece of classroom work, no? But the operative word is engagement, no? Task where you will know whether they're progressing, whether they're learning. but something that engages learners in what? In comprehension, in manipulation, in production. Because of course, we all know that in Anderson's level of thinking, when students produce something, the creating level, then they're able to apply, they're able to make use of their skills in a different situation. They're also able to assess, and they're able to recommend and all of that. No, so this task in terms of provide our students the opportunity so that they can produce something, and through a task, so you will know whether they have developed that skill. And of course, something that focuses on meaning. Remember the time when we were in college, or even when we were in grade school, and even some of us took a master's and PhD, that the time when we were able to, when we had an activity that engages us, maybe not very easy, but really required us to apply our skill, those really helped us remember. So retention is also, and transfer, we learn the skill. No? So another way of looking at performance stat is something that is a culminating activity, maybe a culminating activity such as a capstone, thesis, no, that at the end of the semester, but maybe a culminating activity for a certain unit for you to determine whether after several topics and several sessions, our students were able to develop the skill. So then something that you provide them, an activity, is also called the performance task, no? Or these are performance tasks are where you're asking your students to apply what they have learned during the lesson. So it could be an individual or group work. Yesterday, we're going to provide the video of yesterday, maybe a little bit later. A YouTube link will be given to me at our Region 10's Facebook page. So why did I say that? Because yesterday I also presented several ways on assessing in the new normal. So I presented, if this was your face-to-face, this can be your way of determining whether students have learned, but in the new normal, using technology tools and all that. So can they still do group work in this new normal? Yes, they can have Messenger. They can also use Google Drive. They can also use Facebook Live, but in a private group. No, so let's still develop that, because again, we're not changing the curriculum. Let's also develop 21st century skill, even if we have this challenge, not this pandemic. So in the performance task, it could be an individual or a group work, but the emphasis is for students to solve a problem. And in this particular task, retention and transfer. If you are assessing not just written, no, not just responding to a certain item. If they are really going to demonstrate to the faculty that they can apply, retention and transfer of skill is best. No, the point here is that our students will really retain the learned material. Of course, we all have a lot of, we've read a lot of literature that says, and some of us have experienced that usually after the end of the sem, they forget everything with that. But if we are focusing on performance tasks in terms of assessing our students, retention will be highly likely. No? So how do we create a performance assessment? Number one, we match the assessment and the course outcomes. No, if you're asking your students to do, if you expected your students at the end of the semester to demonstrate this, then the assessment should provide this particular opportunity to do that. No? Number two, write an engaging scenario. Number three, then you have to break tasks, as shared yesterday by Engineer Marcilia. you have a bigger culminating capstone activity or a capstone project at the end of the semester, but the tasks are in phases. And then of course, let's create a scoring rubric. So let me just a little bit discuss each of the steps. Number one, match the assessment with course outcome. So just an example, I've already presented this yesterday, but just to give emphasis, that if the program, say for example, the program is BS Hospitality Management, the course outcome at the end of the semester, the students in this particular subject should be able to apply safety procedures for handling food stuff. No, the performance indicator is that the student should be able to handle and store foodstuffs in a manner that avoids damage and contamination, no? Maintain hygiene standards and maintains quality. So what would be our performance task or our assessment task? So a faculty may ask the students to really perform, but the tool to be used is a workplace skills appraisal checklist, which is actually created by experts in the field. So meaning that this particular tool is used and the student will be able to demonstrate that they can do these procedure, no, for handling foodstuffs. All right. All right. So say for example, BS secondary education. The subject or the course is technology for teaching and learning too. At the end of the course, you have designed your syllabus that at the end of the course, our students will have the ability to produce learning resources using technology tools, no, in various areas. So will my task be our students will just have to explain their plan? That means that is not going to demonstrate, that is not going to show me as a faculty if our students can really produce learning outcomes, if they are just going to tell me their plans, correct? How about if they're just going to give me a report on what are the technology tools? So meaning that if they're just going to give me a report in class of the different technology tools, okay, that would be great. But is that aligned to the course outcome? Because the course outcome says at the end of the semester or within the course of the semester, our students should be able to produce learning resources. So therefore, the task should be that our students will create instructional materials using technology. The task. But of course, we have to give instruction on how, and we have to give instruction as to the context. All right. So another example is on business administration. The subject is operations management. The course outcome says that at the end or within the entire semester, our students should be able to demonstrate that they can apply management theories, no, and methods and to various types of organizations. So what will I ask my students? What is going to be the task so that I will be able to determine that they have really achieved this outcome? So maybe I will ask my students to propose social responsibility strategies and compliance action plan for a business. No? So that can be considered. Okay, so that's the reason why when we are creating performance assessment, first we have to ensure that our performance task, the PIT is our term in my university. I think I wasn't able to edit that because we call it a performance innovative task, and our course outcome should align. And then of course we have to write an engaging scenario. So you do not just tell your students, okay, you have to create material. You have to situate, give them a situation so that they would exactly know, and they would exactly know the context where they're going to deliver in terms of the delivering and producing the product. No? So some of the suggestions from specialists in the field that when we are creating an engaging scenario, we set relevant real world context. So maybe current situation, so that the students will be able to demonstrate that outcome. No? And then we have to create that scenario where we offer the students a challenge to meet, and also we are going to define the rule the student will assume. So in that particular situation, we have to also show or tell a student, in this particular situation, you're the mayor. In this particular situation, you are the CEO. In this particular situation, you are the assistant and all that. No? And then, of course, who is the audience? So preferably external. So we don't just say, okay, in here, you're the student. Of course, in that, of course, they're a student. But you have to provide them a hypothetical situation. But of course, it's hypothetical, but it's happening in the real world. No? And then, of course, when we give performance assessment, we specify the product as well as the perform. Exactly what are they going to produce? So some examples from Wiggins and Akshay that will help us create that engaging scenario is through using the GRASP model. No? Goal, role, audience, situation, product, and criteria. So some of us may be asking, parang pang basic education, no? But you know, some of the educational philosophies, methods, and models, they cut across levels. Wala tayong pang ano yan, pang elementary or what. This is when we are providing tasks for our students, so that we can give them a very good engaging scenario. This might help, no? From Wiggins and Mactai. So when we create the goal, maybe these are the prompts. No? The challenge is when we provide role, maybe you can say you are. So we will provide this, no? And then audience. But let me present a sample performance task from your college. No? This is a college abroad. No? So this will also tell us na, in other universities abroad pala, performance tasks has been really are becoming popular, as well as using the rubric. So example, this is the engaging scenario. Number one, you are the assistant to Pat Williams, the president of Dynatech, a company that makes precision electronic instruments and navigational equipment. Sally Evans, a member of Dynatech's sales force, recommended that Dynatech buy a small private plane, no? That she and other members of the sales force could use to visit customers. So in this, there is already what is the role of the student in this task. What's the role? Okay, so that when they produce what they're going to turn into you, they know their role, that in this situation they are the assistant. So let me just proceed. So in the situation you said Pat was about to approve. Remember, Pat is the president. You, the student, is the assistant. Pat was about to approve the purchase when there was an accident involving a Swift Air. No? You are provided with the following. So Pat was about to approve. That is the situation. And then this, you are provided with this: newspaper, reports, emails, performance characteristics, article, pictures, and description. That gives us the entire situation or the context, which the students, whatever product is required by the faculty, will be able to situate themselves, no? Or these are the information that they're going to consider. Okay, so there's a context. And then, what else? Please prepare a memo. So you are the assistant, that was the consideration. What are they going to produce? They are going to prepare a memo that addresses several questions, including what data support or refute the claim that the type of wing on the Swift Air leads to more in-flight breakups, what other factors might have contributed to the accident and should be taken into account. Your overall recommendation about whether or not Dynatech should purchase the plane. Remember, you are the assistant to the president. So what did we have here? Standards and criteria. We ask our students to prepare a memo, but what is the quality of that memo? We specified in this particular situation that the memo should have the data support, no? And other factors that might have contributed to the accident and should be taken into account. And what is the goal of this entire performance task? That you are going to use overall recommendation. So what do we think is the course outcome? Maybe ang topic ng mga estudyante dinhi is to and the goal of the faculty is to maybe determine whether our students can analyze a case, no, and can prepare a memo as well, can also assess the situation, can evaluate and make judgments and all that, no? And then of course, when we give them and then when they turn in their product, if they have misconceptions, it would be very glaring because the product or the memo or the written response submitted to you, to the faculty, will also reveal to what extent they have learned, to what extent they have achieved the course outcome. And that's the reason why it's very powerful to provide them an opportunity to do a performance task rather than define memo, rather than what are we going to consider in writing a memo, what are we going to consider when we're looking, what are the theories, rather than having that, we don't know if they can even apply and they can even analyze, right? So you can use GRASP if you are new to creating performance tasks, okay? There's also another model used by other university. They call it the SCRAP model. Now, provide the situation, provide the challenge, provide the role, provide the audience, and then provide the product in terms of creating your context or an engaging scenario. What I like about this example is that the topic in social science is about the governments, no? The governments of American democracy and Chinese communism. But the situation is that the mom announces that her company is expanding, no, and then all that. What I like about this is that the focus is not just tell me what is Chinese communism and American democracy. It's not just that. The students will make use all of those information, and then in the real situation right now, if you are going to consider what are your arguments and all that, no? So apply the skill, okay? So if you are asking some examples of the role when you are writing your performance and when you're writing your engaging scenario, you can choose from here. You may also ask your students that in that particular situation, they are the campaign worker, they are the consumer, they are the journalist and all that, no? Some examples of the products, maybe you can ask your students to produce a brochure, produce maps, produce or do a panel discussion. These are example of products and performance, no? So you can choose from here. If this one is not very clear on Facebook, when you download, when we give you our link in YouTube, it's very clear in the video, and you can also have a link to download this particular PowerPoint, okay? All right, so then we break the task, no? So again, describe in detail, explicit step-by-step directions, relate in a cohesive manner to the task before and after it, and progress to a higher level of Bloom's taxonomy. Just a reminder. So some examples of tasks, exactly what are you asking your students? But these are in the lower levels, no? You're asking your students, maybe because it's a task at the end of a unit or just at the end of 2 topics. Maybe you can do this. Ask your students to draw, ask your students to explain, ask your students to match, ask your students to establish, no? And then, but we are recommending that when you are doing a task that is a culminating activity of a performance at the end of a unit, no? You can actually ask your students to really sketch, to investigate, to criticize, to design, no? And to construct. All right. So Those are the suggestions. But when you have already your performance assessment, how do you grade? Because in the past, we have had we have had complaints about, no, we have read a lot of later I'll show you, there are situations where there are complaints about how their output was graded, and rubric will help. So we recommend to our dear faculty to really make use of rubric, because they can actually help our students know what is expected of them, and what are expected of them, what are the criteria, what are the expectations, no? So let me talk about how are we going to construct rubric. Okay, so but exactly what is a rubric? They are a scoring scale used to assess student performance along a task-specific set of criteria. So yesterday, I shared my rubric on math podcast, and that is also what I'm going to share in a while. But just yesterday, I also said that in this new normal, you can ask your students to do a performance task using, they can video themselves, no? And then in here, let me just show you that in last year, when I asked my students to do that, because it's just at the end of a unit, no? That they will submit through our learning management system. This is the same software. Is it the software? This is the same, I think it's software, let me just the term, Moodle, that we are asking you to participate so that you can also have or create your own learning management system in your university. But if you're using a different one, that's okay. Towards the end, maybe 10, 11, 12, day 10, 11, 12, our colleagues from MSU IIT will share to us how we can establish, how we can create our own LMS in our own institution, and also create your own LMS if your institution have not established yet. You can you create your own LMS for your students and for your course. So be with us until day 12. Okay, so just to show you that even in the past, this was last year, my students submitted their video, so, and then they uploaded their a link of their video in our LMS learning management system. But of course, in USTP this year we changed the interface. No? It's more it's called already an e-portal. Okay, again, what is a rubric? It is an assessment tool that clearly indicates achievement criteria across all components of any kind of student work, from written to visual. Emphasis, meaning that when we are assessing, whether we're asking our students to create a drawing, to create a diagram, when we are rating their output, we have a basis for rating and for giving the score. It's not just, it looks good, it's 10. It doesn't look good, it's 9. Or I don't like it, it's 7. We have a clear basis so that our students would know they can also judge, no? They can also self-assess to which level of performance do they stand in that rubric. So this is also used for marking assignments, class participation. We use rubrics also, no? And of course for overall grades. So there are two types of rubric: holistic and analytical. This is an example of a holistic rubric. I got this from this university, no? Holistic, you notice that you get a score of 6. Again, if this is not very clear on Facebook, number 1, you can change the setting, no? High quality of Facebook, but again, you can also click later YouTube so that it's clearer. All right. So look at this. This is an example of a holistic rubric. No, you get score of 6, and this is when you give the description of your score 6 is that you have a clearly excellent speech, and then there's the criteria. When you get that, when you perform the A, B, C, D, E, F, then you get this score. That's an example of a holistic rubric. So, meaning that what you've seen is that it does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion. It focuses, the focus of the score is on overall quality, no? And then it can result in some quicker scoring process, and it is used when purpose of performance assessment is summative in nature. So that's another example of a holistic rubric. Okay, and then of course we have another example which is very popular, which is some personally I like, no, analytic rubric, because this is a fairly focused type of response, no. The fairly focused type of response is required. It results in initially several scores followed by some total score. And what I like about this is that it articulates levels of performance. This is an example of a rubric that I use for the math podcast, no? So if you notice, there's these and all that, but how do we create that? Later, I'll break that down, no? But this is also, this is an example of an essay, and in an essay, we have to also create our rubric, no? A good assessment practice is that when you're asking your students to respond to an essay, the faculty should also have a model of what is an excellent response, no? And in several workshops I conducted with different institutions, when I asked the faculty or the teachers to create an answer to their questions on the essay, some of them would really tell me, you know, what I like about creating my own answer to the essay, because then we realize that we need to change the question so that it's clearer if I wanted something that should result to something like this, no? So this is an example also of a rubric. When we create an answer, then we have to know what are we looking for in the student's answers. So in this example, it classifies a storm as not a hurricane. Then maybe you're assigning, if our student will answer that, or their response is that it is a storm, it is not a hurricane, then you give 1 point. No? And then if the student along the way, they're going to identify absence of something, then that's 2 points. If they can also say that there's an absence of sustained wind, then it's 3 points. If they can identify 3 characteristics of weather system, then that's another 2 points. If you notice, there's no grammar, so we're not looking for grammar, we're not looking for other things. So our faculty can also focus, no, on what they can look for in a student's response. So this can also be very fair for our students as well, no? This is an example of a rubric I personally use during collaboration or teamwork activity for my students. No, the leaders rate and the students or the members also rate their leaders. Okay, so again, remember that we're also developing collaboration. This will also be used when I give feedback to each one of my students in the class. So this is a collaboration rubric, no? So I'm leaving it here. Some of the a link, so you can see the rubrics shared by the different HEIs abroad. My emphasis is that our colleagues in the tertiary education across the globe are really considering using rubrics in their classes, no? So then how do we exactly create a rubric? 1, write the criteria. Okay, but of course you have to be very clear exactly what is the goal of your task. If that is already clear if the outcomes are matched, if there's already a engaging scenario, then we create our rubric. Now we're ready. So with that task, when already an engaging scenario is already done, then what's the criteria of a good product? Okay, so the criteria, just an example, okay. All right, so then why do we need to put a criteria? Because it specifies the characteristics, knowledge, or competencies that should measure the task, no? And the characteristics of a good performance in a task. And then, of course, we recommend you put weight. But some do not want the column here. No, they put the weight here at the bottom. So up to you, okay? But the important thing is the weight assigned in each criterion determines the score of a student, what the score the student will get in a criterion. For me, the message of the weight is that, of course, the introduction is just not of the same weight as when I look at the content, okay? All right, so next we have to write the levels of performance, okay? The levels of performance indicate the appropriate rating or standard for each criterion that the student can get. Question, should it be only 4? Can I have 7? Can I also have 2? Okay. Question, ilan ba dapat? We don't have an absolute answer for that, but here's what you're going to consider. If it's too many levels, 10, then you will have a problem with reliability, specifically inter-rater reliability, no? Because a rubric, when we rate a product, say a project, and you use a rubric, the product did not change, right? But if someone, another faculty will rate, and then we have a very very different rating, then we have a problem with a rubric because the product did not change. What I'm trying to say is that maybe a good number could be 4 or 5. Very few levels, say for example, good and bad, could also be not very useful because of course there's performance or products that are way in the middle, okay? So usually you will see around 4, all right? So again, I'd like to also emphasize that so that we can develop the same standards and quality. That's all right. That's why we use the same rubric even across the same subject or the same course. So dapat mas naku kung grado dito kay mas buutan ang maestra. It's the same product anyway. So if we're using the same rubric, it's the same standard, regardless of who the faculty is, you will still get the same rating. All right? Okay, and then of course, when you have that, write the descriptors. What is let's say for this one, when we say content and when we say proficient, what does it look like? How do we determine if a student gives accurate information and it is provided succinctly, then the score is around here. No? So these descriptors spell out what is expected of students at each level of performance for each criterion. Ang hirap naman, no? Kapoy kayo, but I'll tell you a shortcut later. So this is the look of a rubric. We also put their score. Of course, when our students will perform content and the score and the level is around here in the proficient, then it's going to be 3 times 2 for this level. We have 6. All right. So then we have a score column. In my class, I add another column which is called the self-rating before I also rate. So the students can also have reflection. Huh? Why is that important? Because they need to do, they also can evaluate their own performance, no? So that they can also identify how they can improve their performance and that they can also see their own progress. In my experience, let's say for example, our students are rated themselves 6 on a particular out of 10. No? Our students rated themselves 6. I sit down with them and say, okay, so what happened to 4? What are your considerations? What happened to 4? And what were the factors that hindered you to get these 4 points to be able to give an excellent product? something like that. And of course, I have had a lot of insights, and they also shared to me what are their challenges, their difficulties. No? So when we do consultation and feedbacking with our students, that can really be powerful when we are helping them progress so that they can develop that skill. Okay, so when we are creating a rubric, be very clear with your purpose. Also, determine the most appropriate type of rubric, and then establish your criteria, performance levels that we have shown, and then really edit, test, and revise. If you saw something, no, in your rubric that you needed to improve for next year, then do that. My rubric have evolved from the time I started it. Say, for example, I used a rubric, no, to observe my students in a demonstration. But I noticed that I did not consider class management. So in the next years, I also included that. So our rubric also is a work in progress. All right. So because sometimes some of our professors, oh my God, that's very taxing to create. You have to write the indicator. We are very thankful of the technology, and some of our colleagues abroad, no, that some of our colleagues in the profession are willing to share their template, and some of them you can get from Ruby Star, no, so that's the website for teachers, and this is the criteria. You can just click that. So say, for example, oral projects, and then you click this one. Let me just make that a bit bigger. So say, for example, you click this, and these are your activity or task that you ask your students to do. If you click that, Ruby Star will actually tell you or suggest what are the criteria you wanted to include in this rubric. So you can just click that. And then when you click that, they would give automatically descriptions. So thank you, Ruby Star. And then you can also edit. So it's nice that you download and then you just edit a bit, no, on that, rather than really starting from scratch. Okay. We also are thankful for our campus. Our campus is a collection of all the rubrics, no? So you have rubrics by grade level. What I like about this is that they also have rubrics for undergraduate. You notice that? 84,127. Rubrics for graduate level, rubrics for postgraduate, no? And then we also have rubrics by subject. You notice that? Finance, humanities, nursing, pharmacy, political science, even physics, geology, engineering. You also notice that education, there are 52,000 rubrics that we can choose from. Okay, we can also consider. So other rubrics by type and all that, no? So you can go to this, let me just go to that so that you see a different look. Okay, new share. Go to here. Here, this is the actual room. So you can just sign in, but actually you can just click if you want something about accounting and all that. Okay, so hope that that helps you lessen that I don't know challenge in creating a rubric. So our campus, so you can go to that. But just my final few slides, that when you're grading with rubrics, create your own comment bank. So when we have a rubric, usually I also put blanks at the bottom, because when we do a rubric, when we use a rubric, my students are assessing themselves. But of course, I have to give comments. Remember that feedback is very powerful, so that they develop, no? They improve their performance. But there are also comments that are pabalik-balik, no? Use, say for example, cite resources. So I have a comment bank. I just coined that. So you can use other terms. But comment bank, I have a list of statements already. Kaya mga usahay, pabalik-balik man din ang kailangan nila i-improve. And when you're explain your grading process way before the start of the class. My suggestion, and based from my experience, the rubrics are already provided to my students at the start of class. day one. They know all my rubrics already, participation, what activity they're going to, presentation in my statistics class. They already know the rubric from the start. And when you're grading with rubrics, do blind grading, especially when they're turning in essays, when they're turning in designs. I make sure that I don't see the names, okay? Because of course we're just human beings. We can be biased in terms. We may have some bias with those people who are already performing well. So in class, so if you don't see, if you have a way of not seeing their names before you're grading them, maybe they're just they are on the cover page. So flip all the cover pages, then you begin grading their output. So, return graded activities tasks in a timely manner. Self-explanatory. And based on my experience, please keep a record of the completed rubric, no, so that you have something with you in case there are complaints about grades. So we've shown this yesterday, that consultation and feedbacking in the past or during the face-to-face, we didn't consider yet flexible learning. We really do consultations and feedbacking in front of our students. But this time, which I also tried, we did live, Facebook Live. My students were there and I was explaining and they were explaining to me their design, no? Because I taught the designing assessments. And when they design, say for example, when they were designing portfolio assessment for their class, they're going to tell me, and then of course we have a template, and then I also give my feedback so that they can improve. So we tried this. We did a Facebook Live, no? Of course in a Facebook group that is private. Okay, there. So I just tried to, I'm showing you that for some of us of questions, do college professors use rubric in grading? You will see that it is, no, that our college professors abroad and even in the Philippines, big universities are already making use of rubrics. But will rubrics answer all our grading problems? No, because we can also create rubrics that are not helpful. So that's why we presented to you what are really important things to consider in a rubric, because there are also rubrics that are not very clear. No, they can even create confusion. I'm also showing this that, because this is a good read, using rubrics as a defense against grade appeals. You will see that there's a professor here. They went through several litigation situations because bottom line is the grade that was given to the student, the criteria to which the grade was based was not clear. So the faculty, the professor was not transparent at the start. So of course, after maybe a year or two, for this article, a year or two, although the case was dismissed, the faculty and the professor was placed in a very difficult situation, and we do not want that. We wanted that our students will know exactly how they are graded, and even if they can self-assess that exactly if the rating is 18 over 30, they know it is exactly 18 over 30. No? So that's why send the rubrics way ahead, or tell them how you're going to grade their output. So the rubric can actually give us, give us a quick assessment process, and fair for our students, as well as transparent. So even if there's a complaint, your department chair will come to you and say, there's a complaint, and then you provide the rubric, or your dean, the parents, or chairperson will say, you have rated this correctly and your grading is transparent. Oh, that will help us. So that will be my last slides. I hope that will help you, our dear faculty. No? So if you do have some concerns, you wanted some elaboration, or you wanted to invite me, that's already, my email is there, no? UST. Okay, so we will entertain questions later when Sir Arvin Narvaza will have shared already his experience in crafting the rubric and what's the process. Okay? All right. Let me introduce Sir Arvin Narvaza, our facilitator a while ago. Thank you, Sir Arvin, for saying yes to facilitate when you are also the resource speaker. So Sir Arvin Narvaza earned his bachelor's degree in secondary education in English and his master's degree in communication arts at Xavier University Ateneo de Cagayan. He has served as an academic head at USTP in 2019 as an active and is an active faculty in the Communication Arts, Languages and Literature Unit. He is one of edX Harvard University's Leaders of Learning graduates during the massive open online course through the American Spaces of the U.S. Embassy in Manila in 2017. Currently, he is my colleague, one of our CITL's program heads of the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines. Let me have the opportunity to bring you Sir Arvin, Mr. Narvaza. Sir Arvin.
Thank you, Thank you, Ma'am Amphi, for the introduction. Allow me to share my slides first. All right. Okay, so there you have it. I hope that the slides are clear and I'm heard clearly from where you are watching right now. Okay, so primarily my part is a contextualization of what Dr. Dinagsao has already discussed. This means that a large fraction of my discussion would include sharing of the process that I go through in crafting rubrics and how I use such tool for feedbacking. So in this juncture, I will pose essential questions you might want to consider pondering upon prior crafting your rubrics, but please remember that these information I'll share with you are just suggestions and you may have a different experience or undertaking. Okay, now allow me to ask the first question. Okay, so what process do you go through in creating the rubric? Okay, so ponder on it. So what I'm asking is basically, do you follow specific steps? What are your preparations before you construct the rubric? So again, we may have different processes, but let me share with you the pre, during, and post phases that I go through when I craft my rubrics. Okay? So in the pre-crafting stage, I do research first. So although we have websites that provide rubrics, most of the time I craft my rubric from scratch because I want my rubric to really fit the context of my assessment. And I also I always look into it that the content of my rubric succinctly assesses the skills expected of them in the course. But of course, when I'm short of time, for some reason, I go for the faster route. No? Now, you might ask, what do we have to research about? So in my case, I go in-depth research of the areas that have to be examined for the assessment. Say you would like to, you would like your students to create an instructional video of how to cook gyoza, for example, and say your course is food production. What skill set will you need to read about? What components and indicators do you need to incorporate and emphasize in the rubric? Will you focus on the skills pertaining to video production? Well, you may want to consider some elements, if you want to add value to their effort in creating the video, but it should not have the biggest weight percentage in the rubric unless if your class is on media literacy. Okay? So once you have gathered enough information, you will then have to decide on the rubric type you are going to use. So you are going to use holistic or analytic rubric. Now, before we proceed to the next point, let me pose an inquiry. When are you going to use which rubric type? Remember that if your assessment is summative in nature or that your assessment is targeted to a very specific skill, holistic rubric may be advisable. But if your assessment is formative in nature and that you would need to look into more than just one skill, then the analytic rubric may be best. But oftentimes I find it important that even if the assessment is summative, say a task for a final term, I still opt using analytic rubric because I see to it that my students know very well which part they fell short or lack thereof, thus receiving such grades. So after finally deciding on the rubric type based on the nature of the assessment, it may be a great idea to bring what you have gathered into the classroom to discuss everything with the students. Okay? So however, with our current situation, we can open a discussion forum with our students online where they will have the opportunity to suggest, and we need to also do this ahead of time so we won't cram. However, if you want to do it live, perhaps you could schedule a video call with them. So I find it quite important to engage my students with the process of setting the criteria because I am a strong believer of the principle that instructors are no longer the sole source of information, and rather we are facilitators of our students' understanding. They may see perspectives that we may have failed to see. Okay? So furthermore, I would like to emphasize that our students may be too idealistic in terms of their standards of the assessment. So it is important that we moderate and hopefully reach a point of agreement as to how the rubric would look like content-wise. Then you also have to discuss with them which of the criteria has to be assigned with greater or lesser percentage depending on the importance of the criterion or the skill that has to be evident in the performance. Okay? So let's proceed to the crafting stage now. So of course, you will then structure the rubric. So based from what you have researched, you will then describe each criterion with its respective standard, then assign the descriptors and points to create a scale. So for example, the descriptors that say beginning to exemplary with assigned points of 3 to 10 respectively. So a bit later, I will show you some samples of my rubric so you'll get a vision of what I am verbalizing now. Okay? So after the crafting stage, I then distribute the rubric ahead of time. Why? Because we do not want our students to feel like they are caught red-handed. No? The purpose is to assess them, not to shock or surprise them. Of the many surprises they have received along their years of schooling, no? We do not want our assessment to be part of it. That would be an unnecessary stress for them. Okay? Then once it's assessment time, I critic and then grade. Then I provide them feedback so they will know which parts of their performance they could still improve on, or that I could also correct whatever misconceptions I have witnessed in the course of their performance. Okay? Now, after providing feedback, do I stop? In my case, no. Those phases I went through are only a prelude to the core of my assessment process. So I process the process. This means that I usher them back to why I let them take part of the enterprise. Now, a bit later, I will also explain how I do it and why I do it. So besides the question on process, here's another question. Why is rubric a vital tool for assessment? Okay. Rubrics are vital because, hey, it is vital because it establishes credibility in grading. In what sense, you may ask? No? Credibility in a sense that you have research for the standards and it is something that is not randomly made in your fancy. It means that everything from your rubric are culled from credible sources and are grounded on certain theories and principles. Second is that it provides precise feedback to students' performance. You don't have to explain to your students a lot because everything is already integrated in the description. So all you have to do is suggest what could better their performance and how they would efficiently engender the standards expected of them. Okay, so next is that it reinforces fairness in the assessment process. So sometimes our tendency, admit it, no, is to gravitate towards our biases on outputs we deem attractive to us, no? Even if the skills are not really executed properly or not evident at all. So the role of the rubric is to pave us into that fair and just direction. It basically helps us refocus to what is essential and what we really want our students to learn from. Then it also serves as a protection against grade appeals. I believe this was mentioned by Dr. Ampi earlier, that students may question how we come up with their computed grades. The rubric may be one of our saving graces. You do not want students mobbing into your office and contest your means of assessing them. So in my experience, once the students have understood the way they are graded, they ask less or not ask at all because they trust the way I grade them. And lastly, it provides a bird's eye view of what needs to be improved in the instruction and assessment. So you may have realizations later on that, on what you need to review with them and what concepts, no, you have to reestablish, especially on the essential parts of your lessons, or that you will need to improve your assessment. So this time, okay, we then shift to the student's part. And this is the question: why should you consider letting your students take part in crafting the rubric? What is the relevance of this practice? No? Before we give answers to that, here's a photo of me discussing with my students what we need to include in the rubric. Okay, so basically engaging our students, okay, may help us set with them expectations of the assessment. This approach will actually eliminate students' worries because then they will know what to prepare for. Next is that we establish a contract with our students as to how they will be graded. Again, this is to give them awareness of the grading procedures. Furthermore, it is to open an opportunity for discussions on the content and praxis of the matter. So the rubric could be used as a material to start a discourse about your lessons and how the concepts can be applied to real situations. Okay, then it instills the value of accountability, which also means that because they were part of the decision making, they will have to make sure that they will uphold what they consider are correct, proper, essential, and worthwhile. And finally, they will be able to contrast criticizing from critiquing, as criticizing could lean towards subjectivity and poor judgment, while critiquing is grounded on theory and research. Okay, so at this point, I will show you samples of my assessment along with their respective rubrics, which I and my students made and used in our class. All right. So this is the assessment I have prepared for my job enabling English proficiency course for the midterm examination. And their task was to read a selection or a poem titled Our Queer English Language. And they were to read the poem twice. So on the first attempt of the reading, I will listen and highlight the words which I think they have mispronounced. And right after, I will show them the highlighted words. Then on the second attempt of reading, their goal would be to read all words correctly pronounced, no? So particularly those that were highlighted, okay? So this is an example of a rubric. So this is a holistic rubric, okay, that we have agreed in class along with the assessment. So this is already summative assessment, as I have given quizzes, activities, and other enrichment exercises prior this phase. Also, notice that I am assessing a very specific skill, and so I use the holistic rubric for that. Then I also take note of the things which they had difficulty with, so I can feed it back to them later on. Okay, so here's another assessment I had with my developmental reading course. just recently, no, their task was to compose a critical analysis because my final lesson was on creative reading, which is the highest form of reading. So in this stage, they are expected to understand the subtext of a literary piece through research and insight. You will see here my instructions and the guidelines or specifications. No? So then, here are my guide questions, which students will have to answer prior putting everything into a composition. I understand that they are not English majors and I don't need to feed them literary approaches, no? So their answers to these questions would then be their key points for the discourse. And these questions actually would encourage them to read further. Then, okay, so this is where they will encode and edit their analysis. Okay, notice that I also included a section where they can put the references because everything that is analyzed should be based from, again, from research, no? Or grounded on theory. Okay, so this rubric, okay, that you see on the screen is an analytic rubric that came along with the assessment. So notice that the rubric is hefty of descriptions. And I am telling you right now that the devil is in the details. But when it comes to assessment time, it is worth it because you can easily highlight or identify where your student's at in each criterion. The analytic rubric is two-dimensional because we can identify their levels based on their performance standards, and we also see that every criterion has its respective weight depending on the skill being focused in the assessment. Okay, so on the second page of the rubric, which I'll show you there. Okay, so on the second page of the rubric, you will see very specific comments I later feedback to my students. And you will also see there a portion on student suggestions. This means that after I provide them my feedback, I also solicit from them what they believe is necessary to be improved in the assessment and the rubric itself. So it's generally a two-way or a give and take process. This approach will lend you a perspective you might want to consider for the next time you will employ the same assessment. So indeed, it is beneficial for you as well. No? So you can also see their pictures of me doing the actual thing, all right? Now we are down to our final question. Okay. So how do I process the process? So I process the process by letting my students reflect why I included them in the making of the rubric. No? So why? Because first, this could be a great conversation starter in which I could inject to the discussion that their decisions form the rubric and ultimately their performance, no? And that they have contributed to their own learning based on what they have acquired from their lessons. Okay? So they may have been oblivious of it at first, but once they become aware of it, they will realize that they themselves are responsible for actualizing what they know. So in the bigger picture, you just facilitated them in transforming their knowledge into something tangible. Okay? Because second, okay, through this, they will also learn that the criteria used to assess their performance are the standards of what are deemed correct and proper, which are keys to successfully understand the nature of the concepts tackled in the course. And lastly, because we want them to understand that the concept from the course are non-fleeting and that what they know are very much alive in the world around them. Okay? So after all of these I have shared, in a nutshell, okay, I metacognitively process their learning. using their experience as part of the creation of the rubric. This way, they will see the whole assessment as non-sporadic, it's not random, no? And that it is united to the lesson, carefully made for maximum learning experience. All right? Okay. So, after all of these that I have shared, which hopefully will help you in your flexible learning assessment journey, I will leave you with this piece of thought. Okay? Students can hit any target that they know about, and that stands still for them. So that is all for my part. Thank you and good morning.